Ahi ahi Māori e koutou, ko Bianca ahau. He kahi tohu tohu whakawhiti kōrero ki te puari whakaoranganga hou o Aotearoa. So kia ora everybody, my name's Bianca and I am the Comms Advisor for the Occupational Therapy Board of New Zealand. Thank you so much for coming in this afternoon to join us on our final webinar of the year, Navigating Competency 2. Today, I am joined by our kaitohotohungaio professional advisors, Shaz Bryant and Carolyn Simmons.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. So I will start us off with a karakia. Tuia I runga, tuia I raro, tuia I waho, tuia I roto, tuia te here tangata, karongo te pō, karongo te ao, haumie, huie,
Tai kie.
Tēnei te karanga, tēnei te tangi, kia tūwhera ngā tātou, I te whai ao, ki te ao marawa, tihei.
Mauri ora. Kia ora, Bianca.
This is an excerpt from our Te Tiriti engagement plan that came out this year. So this phrase depicts our journey towards becoming a Te Tiriti engaged organisation. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. He waka e he noa, we are in this waka together. So this is what this webinar is all about, and we are here to assist you in the journey.
So kia ora koutou. What we're going to be looking at today basically is we're going to, of course, the focus is on competency 2, as you can see. We're going to have a little discussion or kōrero around the context of our Te Tiriti partnership, the strategic documents and directions, competency 2 refresh and changes. Then we'll have a wee kōrero about the terminology and concepts. Then we'll be looking at prompts and examples. And then the website resources, and then there'll be a bit of kōrero around what else would be helpful to you. And then we'll have our he pātai, our question and answer session. So looking forward to that. Kia ora.
Thanks, Shaz. So just before we get into unpacking the competencies in more detail, just wanted to give you a little bit of context for the mahi that we've been doing around the competency 2. So this is the vision of Te Poari, united and guided by our unique tiriti relationships in Aotearoa. OTBNZ leads national and international best practice in regulation and occupational therapy practice. And the mission of OTBNZ is to ensure the people of Aotearoa receive clinically and culturally safe, high quality occupational therapy services and practice. And so part of competency 2 is locked into that vision and mission of Te Poari. So in terms of our strategic directions as well, these documents were sent to all of you via email. So if you haven't clicked onto that Te Poari email, please do so. It'll tell you where we're going as in the direction of the responsible authority. So as the strategic directions is towards developing cultural safety and competence standards to increase cultural competency and cultural safety capability and capacity of the workforce, and also of Te Poari itself, so the board members and the secretariat and the environments within which we all do our mahi. And linked into competency 2 is to ensure that competency 2 is understood and reflected in all occupational therapy practice through the e-portfolio. So it links back into the e-portfolio, and competency 2 is a required component of all occupational therapy undergraduate programs. So the undergrads are socialised to our entry-level competencies right at the very beginning of their journey to being and becoming an occupational therapist, kai whakaoranganga hao. And this is evidenced in the provider accreditation monitoring framework and for us as practitioners in our e-portfolios. So the other, if you look, we have a Te Tiriti implementation plan, and we have the Mahere Rautaki strategic plan 2022-2024, which guides the mahi of Te Puari. But also you'll find on the website, and we'll keep repeating this point, that there are many, many resources to support kai whakaorangangahau in journeying in the refreshed competency too. And then the little pickies down there really are just to say that there's also not just paper resource, not just the written word, but also there are people that you can interface with. And I'd like to acknowledge Yvette for the huge mahi that she did in our Tiriti implementation plan, which is also available on the board's website. She's now left us, but she left us with an amazing legacy and way forwards, a journey to travel in our waka. Yeah, so that's a little bit of the documents that underpin where we're going with our mahi with competency 2. And then just again, also always useful to know history, always useful to look backwards. So our journey towards the competency 2 refresh didn't start last year or the year before. It actually probably, it started a long time ago, and credit given to the mahi that was done between the Occupational Therapy Association, Occupational Therapy New Zealand, Whakaorangangahau, Aotearoa, with who partnered with Te Rao Matatini and wrote the document Te Umanga Whakaora. So the occupational therapy, Māori occupational therapies workforce. If you haven't looked at that document, I believe it's on the OTBNZ WNA website, and it's well worth getting hold of and having a good read. And I say that because when you look at that document, much of it is current today. So it kind of suggests that we haven't moved very far really. And one of the biggest signposts of us moving much further is competency 2, the refresh of competency 2. The board also engages in audit activity of the e-portfolio cycles, and so these next 2 documents, 2021, 2022, are documents that are well worth a read and speak to how are we doing with the e-portfolio. The e-portfolio, as you know, evidences a snapshot of how we're doing in relation to our competencies. And so the first 2021 review, there were 70 e-portfolios, if I remember rightly, so 19%. There was evidence of multicultural practice rather than bicultural practice, and we know that, we've got a lot more mature in thinking about bicultural practice, but we've still got a long way to go. But that document informed the mahi of the Refresh project group. And it also came with some recommendations that we really needed to have a deeper understanding of bicultural practice. Then in the 2022 document, there were 81 e-portfolios that were randomly selected, and that the methodology that was used was there was a Pākehā approach to looking at the portfolios in terms of competency 2. So they sliced of competency 2 and they looked at how were we doing with competency 2 specifically, and there was a Pākehā methodology, and then a via Iris conducted a audit based on Māori perspective. And it was interesting because it was close, so really, but a very revealing statistic where Fire Iris found that only 3% met all of the criteria, and that you would expect in terms of competency 2, and the Tangata Tiriti researchers found that 4% met the criteria. So quite a close alignment of the findings, but also not a good finding that only 3% or 4% of the entire workforce was meeting competency too. So we have work to do in that space. And then in 2021, 2022, the board commissioned Alana Marriott to come in and do a review, a cultural audit to determine its current positions and to consider how best as an organisation we could progress as a Te Tiriti based organisation. And so that's that report that you see with the beautiful tiki on it. Yeah, and so that is what then seeded the Te Tiriti implementation plan, which Yvette worked on. And many of the recommendations are now being rolled out. So if you look at historically from 2009 to 21-22, there was a lot of mahi that had gone on to inform what should we do when we refresh competency 2. And so we came to competency 2 and the Te Tiriti implementation plan. So all of those documents are on the website if you want to delve into them much more deeply. So they're available to you to read. That's a potted version. But before I hand on to Shaz, next slide, please, Bianca. I just wanted to, these were some of the quotes that came out of the Marriott report, which are quite helpful for us. She conducted interviews with board members, tikanga advisor, and the Kai Tohungaio, and a number of kai whakaoranganga. So there were 7 Māori practitioners and 4 tangata tiriti practitioners. So I'll just, and you've probably read some of those quotes already as I've been talking, but just to reiterate what some people said, people need to internalise the concept of partnership in their own personal journeys. They need to understand colonisation and racism at personal levels. So that was a practitioner, tangata tiriti. And then someone else said we need to go deeper than biases and understand the belief that's driving it. So again, this notion of really understanding what we mean by our competencies. Practitioners need to identify their own cultural assumptions, biases, and cultural superiority. So that's a tangata whenua practitioner said that. So that's about looking inwards at ourselves, which is an important construct. When you think about the notion of cultural safety, it's all about us and our safety and knowing ourselves. Another person said we need to go deeper than, or did I just say that? Another person said to be truly effective with Māori, you'd be operating in a way that gave effect to tikanga Māori, creating that space for Māori to operate in that way. And that's definitely part of the journey that we're on as Te Puari. And then Māori need support on their personal journeys too. And then the last quotes, how can we be brave to change things and support the profession to work out they can do a lot? So that came from a board member, tangata tiriti, and then also the board, speaking about the board members, needs to, or actually speaking about the whole board, actually, I think the secretariat side of things needs to develop resources, wānanga hui, to make the abstract practical. And so that's all really beautiful feedback to Te Puari in its journey towards being a Te Tiriti based organisation. So that's a little bit of background. So I'll hand over now to Shaz so that she can unpack the competencies for us.
Well, kia ora, Carolyn, and kia ora tātou again. So as you can see, you know, we have this responsiveness to Te Tiriti or Waitangi, and I would just like to say that this is an entirely new competency, as you know, and so that we're all on a journey at the moment. We're all learning about what these performance indicators particularly mean to us. So I just like, even though I'm going to discuss, you know, what each of these performance indicators means basically, but I just want to say that, you know, we're still all learning, and I'm on a learning journey myself, just as Carolyn is. And so these are really like my interpretations of these performance indicators. So, but I do hope it creates a lot of kōrero and discussion, and that, you know, hopefully it's an open platform that you'll be able to ask lots of questions about. So if we just, like, for instance, look at 2.1, which is around supporting tino rangatiratanga for Māori who use your services to improve their well-being and social outcomes. So to me, tino rangatiratanga is all about our self-determination, mana motuhake, or autonomy for our Māori kiritaki. So kiritaki basically means clients. So how are you as a practitioner involving them, partnering and collaborating with them, and supporting them in the design, delivery and monitoring of their own therapy, of their own well-being? And so do they have a say in the mahi that you're doing, or are you doing to them? So are you working with them to allow them the leadership to take the control of their own their own destiny, in particular around their own therapy? Are you supporting their aspirations, and how are you making sure that they do, you know? So 2.2 is about apply whānau tikanga, wairua and hauora to improve outcomes. So so how are you applying whānau tikanga, wairua, hauora, and when working with our kiritaki? And what does that look like? So whānau tikanga, to me anyway, is all about our whānau values, rules, customs, and keeping the whānau safe and protected. And are you doing this in your practice? It may be that you manaaki the whānau by demonstrating care, making sure they are all right, just simple little things. And what practices does the kiritaki whānau practice at home, and how might you apply this to your mahi? And so wairua, as we know, is for some it's all about spirituality, but there is so much more than this. And this is just a brief kōrero around these sort of terms. So wairua which relates to the unseen, unspoken energies, and is often linked to tikanga. So how are you as a practitioner making sure that you lift the spirit of your kiritaki? And do you acknowledge a person's wairua? Because this is something that is often left out when you're working with a kiritaki. So how do you make sure that you are connecting into the wairua of this person that you're working with? And yeah, so wairua, and also wairua is necessary for hauora. So all of these sort of lead into one another. And it's about, so hauora is a holistic Māori worldview of health and well-being. It's unique to Aotearoa and is often described under tā mason juries, te whare tapi whā. And so are you considering in your mahi, your taha tinana, your physical aspirations or side, your taha wairua, your spiritual side, taha hinenaro, your mental well-being, and your taha whānau, because we know our kiritaki don't occur in isolation. You know, we're always important to connect our whānau into working alongside our kiritaki. So 2.3, increase your knowledge of historical, structural and systemic barriers that have led to and continue to lead to inequitable health outcomes for Māori, and then apply this knowledge into your practice. So, so how much do you know or understand the historic, structural and systemic barriers that have and continue to impact on Māori health outcomes today? What do you know not only of Te Tiriti or Waitangi, but what happened afterwards? Do you know about the legislation, the Māori land wars, which basically took away our thriving Māori rights, our whenua and our tonga? And how do you apply this to your mahi when working with Māori? And so what policies and practices favour one advantaged group, while systemically disadvantaged and marginalized groups such as Māori or our Pacifica cousins. And then 2.4, so which is working towards equitable health, occupational, educational, and social outcomes for Māori, and recognizing different Māori, iwi, hapu, and whānau may require different approaches and resources. So 2.4, so we are holistic, client-centered, person-centered kai whakaora ngāngaho. We understand that each person is unique, different, and so it is with Māori. So how are you working towards equitable, not equal, outcomes for Māori and health? And what does this look like? What does equitable occupational health and social outcomes look like in your practice? And so the big word here to me is all around equity. So it's important to understand what equity is. And this may be about offering more resources and different approaches in order to get that equitable outcome. So that's my sort of interpretation of that. 2.5, so applying reflective practice to identify and address conscious and unconscious bias, discrimination and racism to support you to embrace whānau tikanga. So to me, this performance indicator is really all about cultural safety and identifying through your own biases, attitudes, and assumptions, and particularly around racism that I think inherently we all carry to some degree or another. So the reflective practice part here is, of course, that we take this to supervision, if nothing else, or simply to reflect on an incident or something that we may have seen or been involved with, or through, or a thought about what did that make you think about? What's not quite right in that situation? And how can you embrace whānau tikanga when these things are blocking you? So that's a bit of thought there for you. And 2.6, so this is all about data sovereignty. So ensure practice reflects an understanding that Māori data sovereignty is a taonga, and collaborate with Māori so that any data is appropriately collected, used, stored, and destroyed. So this is, as we said, this is what I think. It's all about data for and about how is it protected for Māori? How is it safeguarded and protected? And how are you ensuring this in your practice? So this is about the ethical use of data to enhance the well-being of our people, of our culture. So how are you in your practice ensuring the inherent rights and interests that Māori have in relation to the collection, ownership, and application of Māori data? All data has a whakapapa, a genealogy. So does it provide information about the provenance of the date, the purpose for its collection, the context of its collection, and the parties involved? Do Māori know what you're doing with this data? And so what are the risks and benefits in relation to that data being collected? And are you working collaboratively with your kiritaki, your whānau, to ensure that this data is appropriately collected, used, and stored, and then destroyed? Okay, so that's 2.6. 2.7 is about providing services reflective of tikanga, manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga, as encapsulated in Te Tiriti or Waitangi. So we've spoken a bit about whānau tikanga and what that might look like just previously. And in the following slide, we will also provide some meaning to the different terminology used. But for this performance indicator, you may be looking at how are you providing services reflective of tikanga? So are you or your service behaving in a way that is culturally appropriate or culturally proper? Are you incorporating practices and values from mātauranga Māori, such as like karakia, whanaungatanga, etc.? And so manaakitanga is all about showing respect, generosity, and care to your kiritaki and their whānau. So while, of course, kaitiakitanga is basically guardianship, stewardship, and protecting, which could also pertain to your environment, you know, so are you doing that with your whānau, with your kiritaki? And how are you doing these in practice? And of course, referring them back to Te Tiriti or Waitangi, that encapsulates all of the performance, all of the performance indicators above as well, to the taonga, which includes the health of tangata, of the people, sorry. 2.8, I've actually put 2.8 and 2.9 together. So 2.8 is seeking guidance from kaumātua or a Māori advisor to improve the outcomes of the services that you provide for whānau. And 2.9 is consult with kaumātua or a Māori advisor if needed to help you identify and resolve issues impacting whānau due to systemic bias in government or organisational policy and decision making. So I think this is sort of self-explanatory actually. So how are you accessing guidance from kaumātua or Māori advisors for both of these? And are you building relationships with your Māori advisor or kaumātua? And Te Whatu Ora or the old DHBs. And so that you can come at some stage so that, you know, it's all about building the relationships first. So then when you need to come to ask a kaumātua, for instance, or a Māori advisor about a certain situation that you have maybe working with a whānau and you need that advice, I would say to build that relationship prior to going and asking them about a certain situation. You know, and, you know, how do you seek to advise to resolve those issues, improve the outcomes for your whānau kiritaki? And if not, why not? Good question for supervision. So 2.10 is all about developing relationships with and refer whānau to Māori who work in health or education, iwi providers and whānau ora. So it's pretty self-explanatory. That's about developing and building whanaungatanga relationships with Māori. Seek those relationships out so that if appropriate, you can then refer your kiritaki to Māori practitioners, kapai, because they are maybe the best ones to work with the kiritaki. And 2.11 is to enhance your understanding and use of te reo and other taonga. So once again, I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but it's what you do with this knowledge of te reo Māori, for instance, and other taonga. How does it improve your practice? And also, how does it lead to better outcomes for Māori? That, I think, is the most important thing. And yep, I think that we just managed to get through all performance indicators there. Kia ora, thank you for that. Sorry if it was a little bit drawn out. So here we're looking at different terminology and concepts. And as we've talked about, tino rangatiratanga is the principle of self-determination. And it also provides for mana motu haki. It's directly linked to Article 2 of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And so, and also, so to me, rangatiratanga comes in two parts. The ranga is actually derived from raranga, which means to weave together. And tira means a group, a small group of people. So basically a rangatiratanga is a leader who weaves people together. And, you know, so that's sort of that tino rangatiratanga. Whānau tikanga, so we've talked to you a little bit about whānau tikanga. So tikanga is a broad concept, basically meaning that which is right, correct, and tika. Tikanga refers broadly to customs, rules, and values of Māori knowledge, and is all around mātauranga Māori being authentic, and can include concepts such as tapu and noa, for instance. So what does your whānau kiritaki do as routines or common practices in their whare? Do they take their shoes off outside? Do they practice karakia or not? So find out what those practices are for the whānau tikanga. Wairua, as we mentioned before. So wai, of course, means water. Rua means two. So basically, it's two waters moving alongside each other. And so which, of course, leads us into spirituality. So how do you lift the spirits of the kiritaki that you're working through? How do you lift your own spirits? Just think about that. And is it connecting to te ao, the environment? Do you go take your kiritaki for a walk in the bush, by the water? How do you reconnect them to their wairua? I think that's important. And hauora is all about well-being. As we've talked about before, I think I gave a pretty good explanation overseas. So I would, and I know te whare tapawhā is used a lot to discuss hauora of Māori. Iwi is made up of, is a larger tribal group of Māori, and is made up of different hapu, which is sub-tribes and can have many links, and which is important to Māori particularly, and the hapu is made up of different whānau groups. So basically, whānau, hapu, iwi all go together. And Māori data sovereignty, as we've talked about, is a taonga. So Māori data refers to digital or digitizable information or knowledge about or from Māori people, our language, culture, resources, or environments. And its inherent rights and interests that Māori have in relation to the collection, ownership, and application of Māori data. Tikanga, as we've briefly talked about, is a base principle is tika, which means to be right, to do things correctly, which could involve moral judgments about appropriate ways of behaving and acting in everyday life. Tikanga is more than just rules, and they are best described as a form of social control and can guide the way relationships are formed and how groups interact and how people actually identify themselves. So tikanga can inform frameworks that address ethical issues and guide good behaviour and practice when engaging with Māori and things that matter to them. Manaakitanga is all about nurturing relationships, showing care, respect, and compassion or empathy for tangata, for people. So araha is also an essential part of tikanga, even though it's not in there. So, and kaitiakitanga, it basically it's all about guardianship, protection, particularly of te taiao, the environment. And then, of course, we have those historical, structural, and systemic barriers still raising their heads everywhere. So are historical obstacles that collectively affect Māori disproportionately and perpetuate or maintain stark disparities and outcomes. So we're thinking about policies, practice that favour an advantaged group while systemically disadvantaging a marginalised group such as Māori and can be others. Bias, this is a simple definition is that it's an inclination or prejudice for or against one person or a group, especially considered to be unfair. And these bias can be innate or learned. Equity, people have differences in health that are not only avoidable, but unfair and unjust. In Aotearoa, we recognise different people with different levels of advantage that require different approaches and resources to get equitable health outcomes. And then we go into inequitable outcomes. So health inequities are systemic differences in health outcomes, differences in health status, or in the distribution of health resources between different populations such as Māori el Pacifica, or and Pākehā, sorry. Discrimination is very broad and can mean the unfair or prejudicial treatment of people based on characteristics such as race, skin color, gender, age, etc. So have referred to health discrimination, which can take various negative forms and is often manifested when an individual or a group is denied access to healthcare services which are otherwise unavailable to them. And racism, this is taken from the Ministry of Health working definition of racism, which basically says, racism comprises racial prejudice and societal power and manifests in different ways. It results in the unequal distribution of power, privilege, resources, and opportunity to produce outcomes that chronically favor, privilege, and benefit one group over another. All forms of racism are harmful, and its effects are distinct and not felt equally. Phew.
Chaz, you've been using the word kiritaki. Maybe just add that to the list.
Yes, oh sure, we should do that. So yeah, so kiritaki of course means our client or whānau that we're working to, and we should add that to the list, you're right. What we're looking at now is just prompt questions, and this is actually a summary of a page that's up on our website. So, you know, it might be that your prompts might be, what do you know about local iwi or local tikanga in the town or region that I work? What do I know about my organization's goals or readdressing inequitable or equitable health outcomes? Who are our service users? What do you know about the health statistics in your region and your service? Does this match? Does everyone who could access your services do so? Like, do you have Māori in your services? And what do you know about the perspective of Māori health service users in your area? What types of barriers are there to accessing your service? How do you know this? How do you find out this? And how could your service be adapted to mitigate barriers? And knowledge. So what knowledge do you have of resources available to help you in your work with Māori clients? So what resources do you have on your doorstep? And what kind of networking do you do to enable relationships to build that works for your clients and for your potential kiritaki? And what is your level of knowledge and confidence in your role, abilities to participate in a pōwhiri, for instance, or other occasions? Or working, or just meeting in a client's whare in their home, or in another relevant occasion on a culturally appropriate way. Mm. So consider the occupations that consider the occupations you commonly use in therapeutic interactions. What modifications or variations do you have in your hete to ensure that this will help with equitable outcomes? And consider your knowledge and the use of Māori models of health and well-being in your practice. How might this be further developed? Think about your usual assessment processes. How are you enabling these? What is your cultural perspective of these assessments, for instance? And what shape do your team meetings or whānau meetings take? What influences are there in the meetings that might impact on the flow of information from and between team members and the whānau that you're working with? And everyone should have access to services. So how is this enabled by your service, for instance? And what more might need to be considered? Okay, I think that was all for that one. Yep, ka pai. Cool.
So a lot of questions there that Shaz has given us a really nice way of exploring and really diving deeply into the performance indicators for competency too. So one of the things that came out of those two audits of the e-portfolio cycles, which ended up in the 3%, 4%, who met all of the criteria for reflecting evidence and competency too. One of the key findings that came out of it was that our critical reflections need to indicate how the learning changed in your practice. So it's not just about the e-portfolio, but also your lived practice as a kaiwhakaora occupational therapist. So you know, when you're going through your e-portfolio and you're doing your critical reflection on competency too, you need to go into how did that learning, how did that activity, goal, self-assessment, how did it lead me to change in my practice? And it could be a small change, or it could be a mind-blowing change, or anything in between there. But it has to have application to practice. So not simply that you learned something. It has to go into that application for it to be meaningful. And also a lot of what Shaz has been talking about as well with the refresh of the competencies is really around what does it mean to be culturally safe? What does it mean for me, for our profession to be culturally safe? And so the thank you, Bianca, the quote which we've taken from the work of Ilana Curtis, Associate Professor Ilana Curtis, who works at University of Auckland, I believe, but they've written a nice paper. It's a literature review that looked at the notion of cultural competency and cultural safety. And so this is a really lovely quote that sums it all up. So cultural safety requires health practitioners, that's you and me, that's all of us, to examine themselves and the potential impact of their own culture on clinical interactions, question their own biases, attitudes, assumptions, stereotypes and prejudices that may be contributing to a lower quality of healthcare for some patients or kiritaki, in contrast to cultural competency, which tended to be more of a focus previously. The focus of cultural safety moves to the culture of the clinician. So it looks at us, inwards at us, or the clinical environment rather than the culture of the exotic other patient or kiritaki. So if you're interested in reading that paper, I'm happy to share it. But Curtis and colleagues, 2019, did that, and one of their conclusions from their paper was that their lit review was that we need to move to cultural safety rather than cultural competency. That's what they recommended, and they proposed that definition. Yeah. So that's quite an important concept to take away probably, and put that together with your, you know, how am I going to evidence competency too, which is around responsiveness to Te Tiriti or Waitangi, which is the tangata whenua version of Te Tiriti, not the Pākehā version of the document. So I guess yeah, many resources on the website, but the importance of like keeping ethical, the code of ethics, you know, humming through your supervision and your critical thinking about practice, clinical reasoning. It's also important to keep competency too on your supervision agenda, and it's not just about working with a Māori kiritaki. It's bigger than that. It's about being a citizen of Aotearoa New Zealand. So that's a good place to start our wind down. Our kōrero with you today. So I hand back to Shaz again, who probably needs a drink of water after that marathon kōrero.
Yeah. So here's a nice wee slide, which basically just says, just a reminder that everything is on the website. So if you can see here, you can just click, of course, once you've logged into your practitioner access only, or log into my OTBNZ, then you can click on and responsiveness to Te Tiriti, and hopefully there will be lots of information in there that will help you on your journey to becoming culturally competent. And also just remember that myself and Carolyn particularly are always available to answer any kōrero as we need to. So, kia ora for that. Cool.
So we do have a pātai to the profession?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
yep.
so yeah, I mean,
Yep,
we'll move on to answer Q&A section, but we do have a pātai to you.
Yeah.
As our colleagues and members of the profession, which is what other supports from Te Puari would be helpful for you to understand and navigate and apply competency to. So we don't need you to necessarily answer that today, but we'd love some commenting from you.
Yeah, kia ora. And so basically here we are at our question and answer time. And before we begin the question and answer times, I might just say this little whakatauki, which goes kia whakamomori, te haere whakamua. So I look backwards into the future with my eyes fixed firmly on the past. So that's just sort of encapsulates everything, where we have been, where we're going, and where we are now moving forward. So kia ora, everybody. And so now we have hand over to to Bianca. Yes.
So thank you, guys. So we are now in the question and answer portion. So any questions you may have, just pop them into the Q&A box below or above, wherever that's showing up for you guys. But we are here to answer your questions. Just to reiterate, everything you need should be on our website, but if there's anything else that you need, please let us know by contacting inquiries@otboard.org.nz or getting a hold with one of our kaitoho ngaio.
Kia ora.
So whilst that's happening, I'll just type the article reference into the chat box. Yeah,
that'd be very helpful.
I'm not too tech savvy to quickly.
It's also worth mentioning that we have a few resources available that you can find also on our Responsiveness Te Tiriti page on our website. So one of them is Te Rito, so that is a bicultural competence course, and it's absolutely free to all practitioners and undergraduates. So all you need to do is email terito@otboard.org.nz for your login. So once you complete that course, you can complete it again and again. And it's good to get a refresher on your cultural competencies.
There's also references and resources on the association website as well. If you're a member, that you can access that too.
Yeah.
Cool. But once again, I'd just like to also reiterate for those that have joined us on this webinar, thank you for attending. I think this is a really important competency for us all. So it's nice to see those that are here. And so hopefully you'll go away and have a think about what we've discussed, and then maybe you will come back with any queries, as we've said before, at any time. Yeah. Sure.
Someone has asked, you mentioned the article talking about moving from cultural competence to cultural safety. Will there be a refresh of competency 4?
No, I don't think so. Do you want to talk to the concept of cultural safety in relation to tangata whenua Māori?
So really, I think at the moment our Te Puari is putting forward a paper on cultural safety, which is slightly different from cultural competency, because cultural competency is all about our cultural safe practice. Oh, sorry, our culturally competent practice, but cultural safe to me is more about looking into ourselves and looking at our own biases and prejudices. And Te Puari is now putting forward a cultural safety paper, which will be available shortly. Yeah, I don't know, do you want to say anything else, Carolyn, to that?
Yeah, so I mean, the authors weren't saying that we would stop being, that cultural competence was taken away, but the thrust of the argument is that we need to be looking at ourselves and being safe and self-aware and fully open to where we're coming from to be safe with working with Māori. And if you were safe, then that has a link to competence as well. But remember, competency 4 includes being culturally competent and safe with other ethnicities. But competency 4 is about safe, ethical, legal, and culturally competent practice. And the competencies are about being competent, meeting the standards, entry-level competencies, and then spiraling upward depending on how experienced and where we work. But our competencies for registration and continuing practice. So competency 4 is all about safe, ethical, and legal, and culturally competent practice. So it's but we have that separate competency too, which is about being our responsiveness to Te Tiriti or Waitangi.
And also that we sort of redid all the competencies earlier this year, like, you know, competency 1 has been reduced, some of the performance indicators changed, just as competency 4 has been also, really, when you think about it. So at this stage, I don't think there is a refresh in mind.
Yes, they were all refreshed at the same time.
Yes, so they've all been refreshed. And the biggest, if you remember, well, if you were at the webinar or want to go back and watch the webinar on the competencies, we talked about the refresh and how they were, all the performance indicators were refreshed and the language changed, and making sure that that other cultural aspects of our practice then sat in competency 4, because that was part of the confusion between competency 2 and competency 4. And people thinking that competency 2 was about all cultures, but competency 2 is about being tangata tiriti or tangata whenua, or that partnership and responsive to Te Tiriti or Waitangi. Did the reference come up for people of that Curtis article that I talked about?
Chat is currently disabled, so probably I don't think
it won't show in chat, but I answered it in the Q&A. Maybe it didn't come in for everyone. Maybe I only answered for the person who asked the question.
Yes, that's okay. So when I upload this to YouTube, when it's we will include this link.
Okay, that would be great, because I think if you Google the article, it comes up as a PDF for people. So that will be good.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. So when this when this gets uploaded to YouTube, I'll also put a link to our previous webinar, which covers the whole load of the competencies.
Yes.
So
would be good.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, So we would, if you're having a big exciting end of year final in-service, you could have a run of 3 webinar, Te Puari webinars to end your year, scintillating.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes. This is our last one of the whole year, so
we
won't see you before Christmas. No.
No, that's right. Yeah. So Meri Kiri he meti, everybody. Have a wonderful Christmas.
And we will see you in the new year with more webinars.
Ka pai?
If there are no more questions, I will just close this off with a karakia and let us continue on with our afternoon. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga, ki te wairua tapu, ake. Have a lovely day, everybody, and have a good rest of the year.
Yeah. Kia ora.
Ka kite anō, everyone. Ka kite.